Hey everybody, we are back, part 2 with Brad. Ewell, is it? Do I say Ewell?
Ewell, that's right. Yep.
I said Ewell or Ewell. What kind of? Well, interesting. Is that a German or is that?
It seems like about every month ancestry changes. I am mostly English, like England, and then it goes back and forth between Scotland and Ireland, where the rest of it's from.
Nice. So we covered a lot on the first episode, and we may break this up into 3 episodes. We'll see where we get today, because this truly is a fascinating story, and I didn't realize how interested people are in this situation, because there are so many people in our country and in the world that are adopted, and there's some out there, as we're learning, that did not know that they were adopted. And I sort of apologized to Brad, because when he first told me, so let's in case if you're coming into the part 2, I highly recommend you go watch part 1. It's on our YouTube channel. Look up the Brad story part 1 so that you can learn what happened. But just in summary, Brad found out about 50 years later that he was indeed adopted, and he was raised by very nice parents. And through getting on Ancestry and getting contacted from somebody randomly on Facebook, and all of these events happened, he finds out that he is indeed adopted, which his dad confirms. And I think one of the things that frustrated him, and I'm finding out that this happens more than we know, is that he was never told. And from what Brad has told us is that, he would have been fine being adopted had he had been told, and he could have lived his life that way and dealt with that part of being adopted, which from what I understand, and from a lot of people that have given feedback, is there's a lot of very happy adopted children, very grateful to be adopted, wouldn't want any other parents, and are grateful that their birth parents had them so that they could be in this world, and are grateful that their birth parents made the decision because they couldn't keep them, to give them to nice parents. But if you grew up not knowing that, and then you find out in the middle of your life, literally like 50 years old, that could cause a lot of trauma. And it could cause a lot of pain, frustration, betrayal, not understanding why weren't you told. Now you know that you have this entire different bloodline that you never knew about. And I think for Brad, and he's going to talk about this more, he loves his parents that raised him, but he is highly frustrated that they didn't tell him. And I don't think he really will ever know why. I think he can only speculate, but we will move past that, and maybe we'll get back to that in a little bit. There's a whole other fascinating part of this story, and truly, I believe, has had incredible happy endings and twists and turns that I think are going to blow your mind. And so buckle up, fasten your seatbelts, get your watches on. I'm about to get stepping because I'm lacking in the step department today. And let's get to part 2. So Brad, we found out you're adopted, and we've gotten it confirmed, the birth certificate with your dad telling you and all of this. So you're in the middle of dealing with this information. Walk us through what happens next.
Okay. So I think I got to this in the last episode. Basically, I told Pam, my wife, that I wanted her to be my information filter, at least for the first part of this. So she could find things out for me. She could still talk to this lady that's now, I've learned, is my aunt. They've already built kind of a chatting relationship. So my wife can find out information, and I can let her tell me. We had been together since high school, so safe place to learn things, somebody I trust to tell me things. So that just seemed like my best option. So she continued to talk to my aunt and just let my aunt tell her kind of my backstory. And I was getting bits and pieces of it from her. And really, I thought I was going to wait a lot longer to kind of let it all settle in, but it was very hard to have all of that out there and not know. So I think it was the night after that I had confirmed it with my dad that I was adopted. we were over at a friend's house, and they've been close friends of ours for a long time. We had already told them the story. And because we were sitting around talking about it, I asked Pam, hey, did you learn anything else yet? And she's like, oh, yeah, I've learned quite a bit. I don't think you want to dive off into all that right now. And I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, I kind of do. That's why I'm asking. So she says, I'll tell you what, just let me give you my phone, because she'd been texting with my aunt. She said, let me give you my phone. You can read it. And that way we don't have to just sit here and talk about it if it turns out to be stuff you don't want to talk about. So I get her phone, and I get to see pictures of my half sister from my mom's side, my half brother from my mom's side, the aunt that contacted us, two other aunts that I had yet to meet, that I hadn't met or that I didn't know about yet, several uncles that I didn't know about yet, a couple of who had already passed before I'd ever learned. I learned, I think one of the first things Pam told me was that my biological mom had died 19 years before I found out I was adopted.
So how did that make you feel?
That was a hard thing, because I knew that I was going to want to bring some kind of closure to this story. Or in my own head, there's really no closure to it, but in my own head, to tie up some loose ends, and knowing that I was never going to get to meet my biological mother leaves a huge hole that no matter how hard my aunts, my half sister, my half brother have tried, they can't fill that information gap like meeting her would.
So, I mean, do you grieve that situation? I mean, you never met her, so.
Eventually, yes.
So you do grieve that.
There's a word, disenfranchised grief, which is grief that you can't quite figure out what to do with because you don't quite know how to do it, because like you said, I never met her. So, I mean, to this day, that's one of the few things I have not done. She was cremated. Her ashes were scattered. My half sister gave me a video of that ceremony. It's sitting in a box right next to me. I have yet to watch it. I will one day. I still haven't gotten my head wrapped around doing that yet. She has a memorial bench at a cemetery in Dallas, probably 30 minutes away.
Sounds like she was well loved.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I gotta ask this question, and I'm sure you're gonna get to this.
Yep.
Why?
Why what?
Why did she put you up for adoption?
I'll get to it.
Okay.
It's a large and long part of the story.
Okay, got it.
So
she sounds like I mean that's a lot to do for somebody.
Yeah, it was. She was in, we'll talk about it, but she was in a really hard spot.
Okay.
So haven't been to her memorial bench yet, haven't watched her memorial tape yet, or video. That'll come at some point.
Did you look like her?
Yeah. Not, I think I look more like my bio dad than her, but that's probably just because I'm a guy and he's a guy. But she and I do share some resemblance. But so as I was going through Pam's phone and looking at all these pictures, I get to info about bio dad.
Oh, boy.
And like I said in the last one we did, at this point in my life, I'd been a police officer for, I think, 24 years. And what I learned is that my bio dad's been in prison since 1972.
Wow.
So he was on his 48th year in prison when I found out that I was adopted.
That is a lot to take in.
That is.
But you're already still dealing with the fact that he even exists.
Yes.
And now, are you thinking, oh my God, I don't even want to know this information?
It wasn't that I didn't want to know, but because of being a cop for that long, it did absolutely color what I expected if I ever decided to meet him.
Right.
So it did put a damper on, a lot of people get excited to meet bio family, and suddenly I'm going, oh, I don't even know if I want to do that. So I learned that. I also learned, this is probably the good time to get into.
Was the prison in the Dallas area?
No, he was actually put in prison in Louisiana at Angola State Penitentiary.
And he had been there for 40 years?
48 years. He went in 72.
And you would have been like 2.
I would have been 2. I was born in 70.
And did he know you existed?
Nope.
Wow. Okay.
So along with that came the story of how my aunt believed I came to be. Now, I've confirmed all of this later. Back then, this was all just her theory, which gets into some of her other motivations. So the aunt that found me through Ancestry, just through all the weirdness in the world, she was basically, when I was born, she was living in Dallas. Her little sister, my bio mom, graduated from high school, moved to Dallas to go live with her sister because she was tired of living at home with her parents. And they were here when my mom got pregnant, when my bio mom got pregnant. So you have to remember, this is late 69, early 70. This is before video chat, Skype, cell phones. People weren't jumping on planes and flying all over the place. You could absolutely, and she did, carry a child to term and never tell a soul because all of her family was in Stockton, California, except for her and her sister. Mm-hmm. And that's what she chose to do. She didn't tell her mom, her dad. She was, I think, she was 17 going on 18 at the time, or she may have turned 18 by then. But she just kept it to herself, told her sister that she wanted to have me and give me up for adoption, and wouldn't talk about who the bio dad was or anything like that. Said that she was just pregnant and this is what she needed to do to take care of it.
Well, can you say her name or no?
Her name was Glinda.
Linda. Okay.
Yep.
We have pictures of Linda.
Yeah, I've got a few.
Okay.
So she decides to do this. She swears her sister to secrecy, and they follow through with their plan. Now, this is where me finding out and all the weird stuff that happened, as far as when I found out and started putting it together, all comes together. So they lived about 4 miles away from where my grandparents on my mom's side lived. And in between them and my grandparents, about 2 miles away from each of them, was that little white cinder block women's clinic with the green awning,
right,
that Dr. Carmichael worked at.
Right.
Dr. Carmichael was a family friend of my grandparents and my parents. At some point that I don't know exactly when, my mom and dad had learned that they couldn't have kids. And at a dinner hanging out with my mom's parents and Dr. Carmichael, they just offhandedly mentioned we might want to adopt a baby boy one day. And that was that, just an offhanded mention of it. Well, fast forward to my bio mom shows up in his clinic and is having a baby boy that she wants to give up for adoption. He calls my parents and says, "Hey, did y'all really mean that you might want to adopt a kid? Because if you do, I have one." And they decided they wanted to.
Wow.
So they, at the time, were living in Chicago with a plan of coming back to Dallas. My dad was based in Chicago as a pilot. The ultimate plan was,
commercial pilot?
Yeah. He was a commercial pilot and still flying in the Navy then.
For like Delta, American, one of those?
American.
Okay.
So they had planned to come back to Dallas, and this seemed like the perfect plan to have a baby since they could, or get a baby since they couldn't have one. You asked me last time, and I don't know exactly where the infertility fell with my parents. That was something that they talked about a little after I found out, but you could tell wasn't something they really wanted to dive off into. And I didn't see any reason to figure out which one of them couldn't have kids or both of them couldn't, because it just flat didn't matter.
Let me ask you this question, Brad, because have you ever just sat down with your mom and said, "Mom, just talk to me. Tell me everything that happened and why"?
I would love to, but by the time I found out, my mom had early sliding on into mid-stage Alzheimer's, and now she has bad Alzheimer's, and there's no answers to come from my mom.
Got it. So she really doesn't know what's going on.
No, it's hard to say because it sounds awful, but it's the truth. Alzheimer's and her not knowing that I know that I'm adopted anymore is probably one of the best things that ever happened to us.
Right.
Because for the time that she was cognizant of it, it was a huge problem for her, which then in turn would become a huge problem for me. So it's worked out better for our relationship now that, as far as she knows, I have no clue. I don't have any desire to make her relive that I know. So we just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
My dad, on the other hand, I would have loved to have talked to him about it. I tried a couple times, and he was not open to that conversation until a week before he died, when I was at the hospital with him one day without my mom being there. And he,
That's bad luck.
what?
That's bad luck.
Well, it was honestly good, because it sucked that my dad died when he did, but I got closure with him prior to him dying, or I would probably still have a lot more questions, a lot more frustration.
So you're not angry with your dad anymore?
I'm not. I won't say I'm not angry. I'll never be pleased with the secret that they chose to keep. Mom or dad, either one.
Because at the end of the day, you still would have loved him. It would have been fine. You just would have known.
Well, and we'll dive off into this later probably, but I honestly think, had I known, my mom and I would have had a much better relationship than we ended up having. Now, that's a guess, but based on some things that I've learned over these last few years, I think we would have been better off with me knowing.
Isn't that interesting?
Yep. So, and I'll talk about why that is here in a little bit. But so I've kind of lost track of where we were. So what ended up happening shortly before my father died my dad died, was we got to talking about, he actually woke up one night when I was at the hospital with him, told me that he thought he was dying. We had already talked about him dying. He had a DNR. And I said, do you mean you're dying right now? Or you mean just in general, you think you're not going to get well from this? And he goes, no, I think I'm dying right now. And I said, okay, what do you want to do? And he goes, well, let's talk about your bio family. And I said, Dad, I've known this now. He passed just shy of a year of me knowing. He had never been willing to talk about it. It had come up in a couple of conversations, and he had made a hard 90-degree turn away from that topic as fast as he could. So I didn't think he wanted to talk about it. And that was frustrating for me, but I also wanted to respect that he didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to make him do it if he didn't want to.
Did he have cancer?
No, I think he had COVID, is what I think. He died of COVID. I'll never know, because he died on March 13th of 2020. And I think it was March 24th was when the whole world shut down.
Yeah, probably.
But all of his symptoms point towards COVID. And he was, like I said, he was a pilot. He was a retired pilot then, but all of his friends were still active international pilots. So if all of that came from overseas somewhere, he would have absolutely been around people that were carrying that around. So he's in the hospital thinking he's dying. He tells me he wants to talk about my bio family. And I tell him, listen, I didn't think you wanted to talk about that. And he said, well, no, I've never wanted to talk about it because it's very upsetting to your mom. And that's probably my frustration with him, is at the end of the day, he 100% chose to always make sure she was never upset before anything else.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, which was his choice. And I'm probably, I would say, likely to be the same way with Pam. But it is, as the kid side of it, it's not always the best feeling. So we talked all the way through meeting my bio family. I showed him pictures of everybody. So we got to have a really good closure on it. By the time he passed, my mom's Alzheimer's was so bad that there's no way for us to have closure over it. So it's just best now that she doesn't.
But your dad never got to the whole why?
No, he never did. The talk that we had maybe lasted about an hour and ended when he fell back asleep. Yeah. So I was answering his questions, not the other way around. And then he dozed back off and went back to sleep for the night. And then the next morning, Mom was there and there was no more talking about it.
So now your dad's passed away.
Well, so before that, that happened a year into finding out. So I find out I'm adopted. The next thing that happens, I think that we didn't talk about that Saturday, we were with friends. I read all about bio dads in prison. I also find out that bio dad is also the ex-husband of the aunt that found me through Ancestry.
Weird.
Yeah.
Okay, so wait. He was with your mom and then married your mom's sister.
Other way around. He was married to my mom's sister and started sleeping with her little sister.
Got it.
When she was legally too young to be sleeping with.
It's like aunt / stepmom.
Yes. So that started up. That was a.
So she may not be real fond of you.
Who?
The aunt.
She is, because that's part of the story here later. Is
okay.
I was helpful for part of what she wanted, which was she had always believed that something had gone on between her ex-husband and her sister.
Right.
And could never prove it.
Right.
Her parents and her sisters and her brothers would never believe her. And then along came me, who, when you get to see pictures of me and my bio dad, you can't deny that we are related to each other. So
have you guys actually done a DNA test?
No.
Okay.
But we haven't, but I've matched. He's the only son of his parents. He has one sister. And I've matched up with her to a level higher than I matched up to my mom's aunt or my mom's sister.
So like a nephew.
Huh?
So like you matched as a nephew to his sister.
Yeah, matched as a nephew to his sister, and they have no other relatives.
Okay, then that's
in that age range.
Confirmed.
Yeah, well, that, and I mean, he's fully admitted that yes, he was sleeping with my bio mom at the time. So it's not like I wonder if they knew each other. That's all pretty much done. So that was part of my aunt's thing, was now she had some kind of proof that what she's told the family all along was true, which was that my mom and her ex-husband and husband at one point had a sexual relationship. So the way that really broke down was my bio dad, bio mom, my aunt, everybody, they all lived in Stockton, California, right down the street from each other. Bio dad and aunt got married. My bio father will describe himself to you as terrible, so that's the word I use. He was terrible as a husband. He was terrible about a lot of things. And he pretty much slept with anybody that would. So
you may have some other half siblings walking around.
Currently not according to Ancestry or 23andMe, but I'm always surprised that one doesn't pop up.
Yeah.
So they're all living in California together. My aunt and bio dad get married. They move off to Dallas together. He's in Dallas, sleeping with whoever he wants, out doing criminal things, and eventually meets another woman, gets her pregnant, and tells my aunt that he needs to divorce her because he needs to marry this other woman who's pregnant now. They get divorced. He marries this other woman. Sometime while this other woman is pregnant, my bio mom moves to Dallas to live with her sister.
Did your bio mom, was she in love with him?
I don't know. That's one of those I'll never know because I never get to meet her.
Yeah.
So they rekindle a relationship when he lands back here in Dallas, and the woman that he was married to, let's see, my half brother from my dad's side or bio dad's side was born in June of 69. I came along July of 70. So basically, while his current wife was at home raising their brand new baby, he was out running around still, which was nothing new. So
when you hear these things, does it make you feel bad?
It did for a while, and I've kind of had to come to the point where I have to accept that I do like the fact that I exist on Earth. I like my wife. I like my life. And I don't end up here any other way than the way I ended up here.
And you have 3 kids, right?
Yep. So this would not be my choice for a birth story, but unfortunately, none of us get to choose our birth stories. So I've kind of over these past 4 years made some peace with how I've landed here. So Biomom gets pregnant with me. They see each other a few times while she's pregnant. According to pretty much everybody, well, according to Biodad at least, he knew she was pregnant. They were not an exclusive thing, obviously, because he was married. So he was never told and never assumed the baby was his.
So he never knew that you existed?
No. He knew his girlfriend was having a baby, but never knew that it was his, or had never confirmed that it was his. And I mean, if I've got an unofficial copy of my original birth certificate, and I don't have a father listed on it. So she didn't even put him on the birth certificate. The reason for that, and this will answer your question about why I was given up for adoption. So Biodad was terrible. He had treated my aunt terrible. My aunt's mom and dad had basically disowned her for going back to Dallas with him. And now my biomom's pregnant from him. She sees all the family drama that could ensue from this and just decides to keep who the father is quiet, give me up for adoption, and move on down the road.
Did you ever get any information about your grandparents on your dad's side?
Like a little bit. Like I know a little bit about his dad. I don't know as much about his mom. His mom lived here in Dallas. His dad lived in Stockton. They got divorced. And he was the stereotypical kind of wayward divorced kid where when mom got tired of his games, she'd ship him to Stockton. When dad got tired of his games, he'd ship him back to Dallas.
Yeah, I've heard all about that.
Now, oddly enough, and this is just one of those fun stories to put together later on that took me almost 2.5, 3 years to put together. Turns out that when my bio dad was here in Dallas, when he was here with his mom, he actually went to high school with my adoptive mom.
That's crazy.
They didn't know each other, but they were in school together. I found her old high school yearbook. He was at the point when they were taking school pictures, shipped back to Stockton. So he's listed in her yearbook with no picture.
Huh.
So the adoption goes through.
Do you mind sharing what's his last name, or maybe you don't want to share that?
I'll keep that one to myself.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, like, did you ever think, I would have liked that last name better than mine, you know?
Nah, it wasn't that much better.
Okay.
So my parents go through with the adoption. The way they pick me up it still blows my mind to this day. This was one of the few things that they were willing to tell me about, and really one of the few things they knew. Basically, what they knew was that Dr. Carmichael had a lady who wanted to give up a baby. It was a closed adoption. They never met my biomom. My biomom never learned anything about them. It was all facilitated through an attorney and the doctor. And 2 days after I was born, my parents showed up in the parking lot of the women's clinic. My mom or biomom had been there for 2 days after she had me. Her sister wasn't allowed inside. Nobody was allowed inside the clinic to be with her while she was there.
Wow.
And my parents' attorney walked into the women's clinic, came walking back out with the baby and Dr. Carmichael. I was handed to my parents, and they drove away with me, and that's how an adoption handoff happened in 1970 in a Dallas women's clinic parking lot.
Wow. Did they follow up or anything? Or?
Yeah, I was able to get some paperwork here recently that it looks like Dallas County, because it was an actual legal adoption. Dallas County did a few follow-ups, but not a lot. It was pretty pretty low key back then. If you wanted a kid and you were of the wherewithal to be able to pay the fees and get one, they didn't dig a whole lot, it didn't look like. I mean, if it helps, they didn't dig enough to realize that. So back then, it would have been illegal to adopt a baby in Texas and take them to Chicago.
Right.
My parents lived in Chicago. They made a fake nursery in my grandparents' house, brought me to my grandparents' house anytime that it was time for a follow-up visit from the county, and then would load me back up on a plane and fly back to Chicago.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's kind of how they handled it. Let's see, 2 years after I was born, Biodad, actually less than 2 years, probably a year and a half after I was born, Biodad was arrested in another state and eventually picked up for a murder warrant from Louisiana, brought back to Louisiana, pled guilty, and went to Angola State Penitentiary in 1972.
So he murdered somebody.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
So that's where I had landed on this Saturday night. Was I have a biodad who had a relationship with an underage girl that eventually resulted in me, who also murdered somebody who's now in prison.
And you're thinking, seriously?
Yes. At this point, you asked me yesterday, do I ever wish I didn't know?
That's what I'm saying. At this point, are you like, all right, I don't want to know anymore?
By then, no. I wanted to know everything because it was too late. But I would tell you at the same time, I wished I would have never learned any of it back then. I was living a happy, full life before this all happened. This pretty quickly derailed my life solidly.
Plus, it was kind of during COVID. And
yeah.
That was a bad time for you.
Yep. It was not a fun few years. So that was Saturday. Sunday was the day that I met with my parents. They basically told me the same thing my dad had told me on the phone. Nothing's changed. We still love you. Everything's fine. They couldn't give me any information because they didn't know anything. They adopted me through the doctor and the attorney. They never met my bio mom. There was and I've tried hard to find it and come to the final conclusion it doesn't exist. A lot of adoptees come with, like, if they're from an agency, even back then, come with like an information packet. Here's info about mom. Here's info about dad. Here's their likes, dislikes, where they grew up, things like that, medical issues. I was hoping to eventually get one of those. That doesn't exist for me because mine was all facilitated by a doctor.
Oh, I see.
So they had nothing. They had no information. They didn't know who my bio mom was. So as odd as it ended up being, I spent more of that time explaining to them where I came from than they did explain anything to me because they didn't know anything. Wow. So we had that one conversation.
Did you tell your kids?
Yes.
So guys, my grandma and grandpa aren't really grandma and grandpa.
Well, so that was actually a point of contention with my parents. Was towards the end of us getting together, they told me, well, the one thing that we've talked about, and we don't think you should tell the kids. And I said, well, I'm just going to be honest.
You're going back to the original situation.
Yeah. And I said, you're not going to like this, but y'all's secret is not my secret to carry. And the first thing I'm doing when I get home is telling them. So they weren't thrilled. What we ended up doing finally was I was like, but I also don't want them to be in the turmoil that I'm in. So why don't y'all come over Monday, take them out for lunch, take them for ice cream, do something, spend a little time so they're still seeing grandma and grandpa and everything still feels normal to them. And I'll process the rest of this with Pam. So they did that. I started the first person. I think I talked finally a little bit to my aunt who found me. And then I started chatting with my half sister from Biomom's side, who's just an amazing person. I love her to death. I'm so excited she's in my life. I'm so sorry that we missed 50 years before, that we didn't get to be in each other's lives. Well, I'll get to that part in a minute. But so that part's been pretty bitter to deal with. And we'll get into even more reasons why here in a little bit. But she ended up being the first person that I met, was my half sister from mom's side. So Pam and I met her and her fiance back then at a Mexican food restaurant, had margaritas, sat and talked. And it was so weird because I sat down with somebody who I had never met before. And it was like I'd known her my whole life. There was no awkward silence and weirdness talking to each other. We just hit it off and have been tight ever since.
I can't wait for you to meet my friend, because this part of the story is so similar. She's not yet met her dad yet, but for the last 2 years, she's like best friends with her half sister. Yeah. And they look exactly alike. It's crazy. I'm like, I'll have to show you a picture, but it's.
Yeah. I look without the beard like a male version of my sister.
That's amazing.
Yeah. The downside to this is
your mom's daughter.
Yeah. I have a half sister and half brother on mom's side and a half brother on dad's side.
Okay.
So the bittersweet part of it is I met her in May of 19.
In person or online?
Yes. We started talking in April. We met face to face in May.
Did you get a video of that or anything?
Just some pictures.
Okay.
I'm not a big video person.
Okay.
So started talking in April, met in May, and in November of 19, she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer.
Oh man.
So she is.
That's another similarity. My friend's half sister has cancer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she is currently still with us. She is in palliative care. There's nothing else they can do for her. They've done all the radiation and surgeries they can do. Her tumors have reappeared, and it's just kind of a wait and see thing for us. So
she's in her 50s?
No, she's younger than me. She's in her 40s.
Oh man.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Yep.
You know, you might want to, this is good information for you to have. Do you have daughters?
Yes.
Might be something that you want to have them tell their doctors about.
They have. Okay. We've all had to reboot all of our medical information.
Yeah, because sometimes, I mean, my ex-husband's mother is two of my children's grandmother, and she had uterine cancer, bad, and that can be genetic. And it might be something where my daughter might need to freeze her eggs or something, and get everything removed. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so sister's diagnosed with cancer in her mid-40s. Bio mom died of cancer at 49. I had cancer at 38.
Oh boy. What kind of cancer did your mom die of?
She had lung cancer. She was a lifelong smoker and had lung cancer, and the cancer really didn't kill her. She got sick, got pneumonia, and complications from cancer is what really, got her, but the cancer is what did it all.
So now you got a house full of cancer.
Yep. So meet sister. She's amazing. Next step was probably one of the most overwhelming things I had ever done because I just didn't understand what I was walking into. I have a cousin who's really great that's here in town also, and she was throwing a kind of early Thanksgiving get-together and invited me to come meet some other bio family because I hadn't met a lot of people yet. And I walked into the house with basically everybody that lived locally here in Dallas was there. So all three of my aunts were there. My cousin was there. My sister was there. A different cousin that I didn't really know anything about yet was there. It was a lot.
Were you having anxiety?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was really anxiety provoking, and they didn't do anything wrong, but they all felt like I looked so much like my mother that just imagine being in a room full of people that you don't know that are all just staring at you the whole time you're there.
Was Pam with you?
Yeah. So
I would have probably had to have taken a tranquilizer or something.
yeah. So I survived it, went home and slept good. But so that's how I ended up getting to meet them. Next was my half brother from Biodad's side. Oddly enough, the man that has spent all that time in prison produced one, but not two cops. So half brother on Biodad's side's a cop also.
So are y'all buddies?
Yeah, we get along pretty good.
You didn't mention your other half brother.
I'll get to him. We met much later, so everybody is local. My other half brother, back when all of this started, was in the Austin area. So it wasn't like I could jump in a car, run 30 minutes, and see him.
Mm-hmm.
So we met much later. We talked a little bit by Facebook and by text, but we didn't meet for almost, I think it was almost a year before he ended up in town. Or actually, what we ended up doing that facilitated the meeting was my sister was going to MD Anderson for a cancer deal, and she struggles driving that long of a distance. I drove her to Crockett. He, at this point, had moved to Houston. He drove from Houston to Crockett, and we basically passed her off in Crockett and had lunch together, and that's the first time we met face to face.
So you went from being an only child to having a sister and two brothers.
Yep.
Well, that's kind of cool.
It really is.
That's not really one of the cooler parts about the story.
It really is. We all, I mean, my brother and I from dad's side like the same music. We've now been to several concerts together. We've gotten together. He's been to my house. We've gone out and had beers. We've gone to concerts. We've gotten my wife and his girlfriend together. We've done all kinds of stuff. So that's been great.
What does Pam think about all this?
She's been super cool with it. I mean, she hit it off immediately like I did with my sister. So they talk frequently and get along great. She got along great with my aunt. So they talk quite a bit. My half brother and her don't, on dad's side, don't really talk that much, but it's just not their thing. And then half brother and I on mom's side, we're both those people that don't reach out all the time. So we'll say 3 weeks or a month, one of us will text the other one. We chat for a few minutes and then we move right on down the road, and nobody is like, well, why haven't you talked to me? Because that's just how we both are. So nobody ends up worked up about the long pauses in between. So that's all the half siblings. So that all, and then I think right after that one, the aunt that found me finally came to town, so I got to meet her. No, actually, I met her at that big party.
And you said you have mixed feelings about that?
A little bit. She's a very nice person. It's not really fair for her, but ultimately she threw a hand grenade in my lap in the middle of my life that I'm not mad at her for, but it's also not easy to forget that's who she is every time I see her.
Yeah, I relate to that.
And then on top of it, her personality and my personality are very different. So we talk, we do okay, but will we ever be as tight as like I am with my sister or I was with one of my other aunts? Probably not. But that's no fault of hers, really. That's just me.
Do you have lots of cousins, aunts, and uncles from your adopted family?
No. I have 3 cousins from my dad's side that are all, well, they were all in California. Now 2 are in California and 1 is in Alabama. And mom was an only child too, so none from her side.
So nobody had any input on that side?
No. So we did all that. I met all them. Where I really finally derailed was Lester Holt did a 48-hour special on Angola State Penitentiary back in...
On Dateline?
Yeah.
I wonder if I've seen it.
Probably.
I've seen almost all of them.
Yeah, he spent 3 nights living in Angola and interviewing prisoners and going to all the different parts.
Wait, say that again?
He spent 3 nights living in Angola State Penitentiary.
The Lester Holt?
Yeah. Interviewing prisoners and going to all the different parts of the prison, interviewing guards and all that. So
So
when
it wasn't a specific story on your dad, but he was in the thing.
Yeah, he was. He wasn't. My dad wasn't even in the thing. It was just a story about where he was.
Oh.
But something about
I'll have to get some clips from that.
Something about seeing where he was threw me into a tailspin. So
That doesn't surprise me.
This was about 6 months in, and for the first 6 months, I told everybody, and it wasn't some big front, that I was really okay with all this. I'd met a cool half sister, half brother. I was talking to another cool half brother. It was a fascinating story, and it seemed to stay that way as long as I was able to keep it at arm's length. And something about seeing where Bio Dad lived made keeping his part of my story at arm's length impossible. So I watched that story, and that was the last time I slept for 3 days straight. And on day 3 of that, I was working nights at the time.
Now, let me stop you there. Were you having feelings of feeling sorry for him? Were you having feelings of, oh my God, I can't believe my blood dad lives here? Like, what was going through your head?
I think it was all of that. There wasn't really any feeling sorry for him. I mean, he murdered a guy. There's no question about why he was in prison. He did something to put himself in prison. So it was more, I can't believe that I'm related to somebody there. And while I had been able to keep him as kind of a concept in my head, because at this point we had exchanged a few emails. I found out that people in prison had email and you could email back and forth. So we had exchanged.
What did you say when you first reached out?
I got really good at writing awkward emails. I sent him one that said, this is an awkward email to send. It'll probably be an awkward email to read. Here's why I'm reaching out to you. He responded back pretty quick that, yes, he knew my bio mom. Yes, it was possible that he was my father. He wasn't sure. He didn't know about me. And then I sent him a picture of me next to a picture of him that I'd gotten from my aunt of us at about the same age. And his next email back to me started with, well, hey, son, I guess there's no denying this. And I was not mentally ready to be called son, and I probably didn't talk to him for a month. I wasn't mad at him. I just couldn't cope with it.
It's like, I'm trying to just imagine, like this is making me upset. Like, I'm trying to imagine how you're feeling. I mean, this is so much information.
Yeah.
For someone to process.
Well, and I think what, you asked this yesterday, and it's an easy enough time to talk about it. I think that's one of the big things of why I'll stand on a soapbox and tell you all day long, kids should know is it should be a normal part of an adopted kid's life conversation for their whole lives, because there's still struggles for any adopted kid. And I can dive off into that in some other segment that you want to talk about, because we're telling a story, not so much informational, but all of us, all adopted people are going to have some struggles. That's just period the way it is.
Are you religious at all?
Yeah.
Do you ever wonder, and I'm just, obviously we've all heard God has a bigger plan and knows what's best for us, but had you grown up, and trust me, I agree, especially after seeing all the responses, that you definitely should have been told this information. But I'm thinking to myself, had you grown up knowing that your dad was in prison all those years, I wonder how that would have affected you.
Well, so first I'll say, from meeting my brother, it would have been really hard, because it's really been hard for him to grow up.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm wondering if, I get what your parents did was a mistake, obviously.
But I'll pause you just for a second, so it's easy, because it's easy to forget this part.
Okay.
They didn't know. They didn't know who my mom was, who my bio dad was. They knew nothing. Okay,
so then let's take that off the table. If we're talking about God, maybe he was protecting you in some kind of way. I don't know. Maybe your life wouldn't be as wonderful as it. Who knows? Like, I'm just trying to think about like what that would have been like growing up, knowing that your dad was in prison all this time.
Yeah. So I never would have known.
Yeah.
But what I've found from talking to a lot of other adoptees is it's growing up knowing you're adopted is hard. It is not an easy road to hoe. It's not because adoption is horrible, but it's a different experience than growing up with your bio family. It just flat is. And what I would say is the difference for them, and what some of them have told me is, at least I've had my whole life to work through this. Like, I could talk to my parent, the ones that especially have had really good parents that were open about it, would talk about adoption. They've been able to work through a lot of their questions and struggles with their family. I got it dropped in my lap at 48 when I was raising 3 kids, was the sole wage earner for the house, had a full-time job working a night shift as a cop, and had to try to manage all of that and keep all my other plates spinning at the same time. And that's a hard thing to do.
And you seem like you're like a big guy, a cop, manly guy, beard, the whole thing, but you seem like a very gentle soul.
I think so.
You
Pam would probably be better to answer that than me.
Yeah, you show your emotions. I think a lot of men would have bottled a lot of this up. I think maybe some men would have just said, I don't want to know anything. Like you actually, I think it's very brave what you've done. And I think your story may impact people all over the world that are considering adopting or considering giving up their child, on how they go about that, because it can really impact somebody's life.
Oh yeah, it completely does. Regardless of if you find out one like I did or know your whole life, it has a huge impact on your life. And that I always say this over and over, because I write a monthly column for a lady's website about adoption issues, but the website is for adoptive parents because she's an adoptive parent. So adoption in and of itself, the basic concept of adoption, taking a kid who does not have a family to raise them, and raising them, is a beautiful thing. For the kid, there is still trauma involved, no matter how awesome of a parent you are.
Because there could be some abandonment issues.
Any research you read will tell you there's abandonment issues.
So, for example, I won't get into it too much personal, but my husband, his biological dad, that he was married to his mother, but left when he was 2 and was just sort of out of the picture. And the parents I believe his mother and his dad, I know this, they raised him. And he always called his stepdad dad. But eventually, down the road, he reunited with his dad. And he said, he felt that hurt his mother and stepdad. But he's like, that's my choice. That's my choice, now that he's over after 18. And so he'll never admit this, but I think that whole situation has affected him to this day a little bit.
Oh, it absolutely does. It affects, there's no way it can't.
Yeah.
So, and this is probably a good time now that you said this to dive off into this. So when I talk about adoption trauma, and I don't want to make this like some long speech or lecture, but I think it's better for people to understand. You cannot find an adoptee that has not experienced trauma. And the only reason I say that is you've got kids of your own, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say before I get into this, that I'll get into this part of it. This is why I think had I known as a kid and been able to know growing up, my mother and I could have had a much better relationship. So you've got your own biological kids. When they got upset when they were infants, could anybody fix it but you?
Mm-mm.
Okay, same for me. I've been around all 3 of my kids from the day they were born. There would come a point when they were having a wall-eyed fit that nothing fixed it but handing them to their mom.
Mm-hmm.
The simple reason for that is you bonded with your kids for 9 months before they came out.
Mm-hmm.
They got used to your smells, your movements, your sounds. They know you before they've ever seen you. So imagine for my mom, and I mean, this is the part where, as much as I'm frustrated with some of her decisions, I feel awful for her. 1970, they didn't do adoption training for adoptive parents. They didn't do any help for relinquishing parents. They basically just handed you a baby and said, hey, this baby's a blank slate. Do what you're going to do. They'll never know any better. Well, you know, just like I know, that for a while in an infant's life, nobody can fix things but their mother. So imagine being handed a kid that throws a fit that you cannot fix because you're not who they're looking for. That's got to be brutal.
Yes.
I feel awful that my mom went through that. And I think that started us in a weird spot that has lasted our whole life. And, you know, it wouldn't have fixed anything as an infant. But I think had I known that in my later years, and I'll pause and say this, from like, I have a cousin that's got several adopted kids. They're very open about their adoption. The kids talk about with both their mom and dad about how adoption is hard on them. Mom and dad listen to that. They work through it. It's great. But even in that situation, those kids still have trauma because there was a relinquishment there, and that's hard on a baby. I think when we were talking yesterday, you had mentioned, like, you know, mammals and raising how we raise kids, and there's the nurturing of a parent.
Mm-hmm.
The other mammal studies show that if you take, I think these were rat studies.
Oh, I know, with a puppy away too long from the mother, they don't end up well.
Yeah. Well, and same thing with the rat study is the opioid receptors in the brain, which are responsible for you feeling pleasure and feeling relaxed and normal, didn't develop in the rats if they were taken away from their mothers.
Huh.
So I think that biologically there is some things that go on in an adoptee's head that isn't their adoptive parents' fault. It's nobody's fault. It's just the reality of the way we're made.